Jabal al-Lawz could be the real Mount Sinai. Some circumstantial evidence that it could be the graveyard where about 3,000 Israelites were buried after they worshipped the golden calf. They were killed there. See Exodus 32 for more on this.
We always assumed the real Mount Sinai was just a matter of tradition, a quiet spot for tourists and monks. But honestly, the geography never quite added up. So we flew a high-spec drone over the lesser-known ridges, half expecting to find nothing but more sand and heat. Instead, the high-res scans started picking up shapes that didn't look natural at all. It turns out the fringe theories might have been right all along, and that changes everything. The modern eye in the sky. Back in the day, if you wanted to find a lost civilization or a biblical landmark, you needed a shovel, a wide-brimmed hat, and about 20 years of patience. Archaeology was a slow, sweaty business of digging holes and hoping you didn't miss something by 3 inches. But things have changed. Today we have drones, and not just the kind you use to take cool sunset photos for your social media. We're talking about units equipped with LiDAR, light detection and ranging, and thermal imaging, tools that basically turn solid ground into a pane of glass. When we sent the drone up over the Sinai Peninsula, the goal wasn't just to get pretty footage. We wanted to see through the layers of history that people have been arguing about for centuries. You see, the traditional site of Mount Sinai, St. Catherine's, has a lot of charm, but it's always felt a bit convenient. It's right where the roads meet. But the drone allowed us to look at the wrong places, the jagged, inaccessible peaks that no one in their right mind would climb without a very good reason. As the drone hummed along at 400 feet, the data started streaming back to the laptop in real time. LiDAR is wild because it pulses laser light at the ground thousands of times per second. It measures how long it takes for that light to bounce back, creating a 3D point cloud. If there's a wall buried under 6 feet of sand, the drone sees the outline. If there's a pile of rocks arranged in a way that nature just doesn't do, the drone flags it. Initially, the screen was just showing the usual chaotic beauty of granite and schist. But as we pushed further into the restricted zones near the border, the noise started to organize. We weren't seeing random erosion anymore. We were seeing straight lines, right angles, things that looked like boundary markers. It was the kind of moment where you stop checking your phone and start leaning in toward the monitor. The fear in archaeology isn't usually about ghosts. It's about being wrong. Or worse, it's about finding out that the stories we've told for 2,000 years were actually happening somewhere else entirely. As the thermal sensors picked up heat signatures reflecting off a strangely blackened peak, a mountain that looked like it had been scorched by a blowtorch, the team went quiet. The data wasn't just interesting. It was a match for descriptions that many historians had written off as purely metaphorical. We weren't looking at a myth anymore. We were looking at a physical site that looked exactly like a massive, ancient camp. But looking closer is where the comfort of technology ends. The geography of a legend. The thing about the Sinai Peninsula is that it's a massive, triangle-shaped piece of dirt that has been a bridge between worlds for basically forever. For centuries, pilgrims and tourists have flocked to a mountain in the southern part of the peninsula known as Jabal Musa. It's got the monastery, the history, and the gift shops. But here's the kicker. If you actually sit down with a map and a Bible, the math for Jabal Musa doesn't really add up. The distances, the travel times, and the sheer lack of archaeological trash, because people always leave trash, make it a bit of a hard sell for skeptics. This is where things get controversial. For a while now, a small but loud group of researchers has been pointing their fingers across the water to Saudi Arabia, specifically at a mountain called Jabal al-Lawz. They claim this is the real Mount Sinai. For years, this was dismissed as Indiana Jones hobbyism. But when we sent the drone over these specific coordinates, the geography started talking back. One of the first things the drone picked up was the color. In many photos, Jabal al-Lawz has a distinct blackened top. Geologists will tell you it's just metamorphosed basalt sitting on top of lighter granite, a natural geological process. But when you see it on a high-res feed, it looks jarringly intentional. It looks like a mountain that has been through a fire. The informal theory has always been that this burn was the result of a divine encounter, but the facts show it's a rare rock formation. Still, the drone found something the naked eye usually misses. The black rocks aren't just at the top, they are scattered in a way that suggests they were once part of a larger structure that collapsed. Then there's the matter of the Golden Calf. Just a short distance from the base of the mountain, the drone's camera locked onto a massive pile of boulders. On their own, they're just rocks. But when you zoom in, and I mean really zoom in, you see the petroglyphs. There are drawings of bovines, cows, and bulls carved into the stone. Here's why that's a big deal. Cows aren't exactly native to this harsh, high desert environment. Ancient people didn't just doodle things they didn't see. Finding Egyptian-style cattle art in the middle of a desert where they shouldn't exist is the kind of geographical anomaly that makes your hair stand up. The drone also mapped out what looks like a massive, natural amphitheater at the base of the peak. According to the old stories, millions of people were supposed to have gathered here. Critics always said, "Where would you put them all?" Well, the 3D topographical map showed a plateau that could easily hold tens of thousands of people with clear sight lines to the mountain's summit. It wasn't just a mountain, it was a stage. What we feared was true wasn't necessarily a miracle caught on tape, but the reality that our maps might be 200 miles off. If the real Mount Sinai isn't in Egypt, but in Saudi Arabia, it doesn't just change a few Sunday school lessons. It reshapes the entire historical understanding of the ancient Near East. We were looking at a landscape that fit the description perfectly, too perfectly for comfort. Mapping the land is one thing, reading the scars on it is another. The artifacts of the fear. When we talk about the fear, it's not just some spooky feeling. In the world of history, the real horror is finding something that shouldn't exist because it forces you to rewrite the textbooks. As the drone hovered over the foothills of Jabal al-Lawz, it started flagging objects that were way too geometric to be natural erosion. The first thing that popped on the LiDAR scan was a set of footings, huge circular stone bases. Now, the desert is full of rocks, but nature doesn't usually arrange them in perfect, repetitive circles. These looked exactly like the remnants of massive tents or boundary markers. In the ancient texts, there's a specific instruction about setting bounds around the mountain so people wouldn't touch it. Seeing those markers on a digital 3D map, spaced out with almost mathematical precision, felt a bit too on the nose. Then we hit the big one, the altar. At the base of the mountain, there's a structure made of massive, uncut stones. To a casual hiker, it might look like a rock slide, but from the bird's-eye view of a drone, you can see the layout. It's an L-shaped structure, and right next to it are these weird, narrow stone corridors. Archaeologists who have studied the site on the ground suggest these were chutes for sacrificial animals. The drone's thermal imaging even picked up different mineral densities in the soil around this area, consistent with high organic content, the kind of thing you'd expect to find if, say, a lot of biological material had been processed there thousands of years ago. But the most unsettling find wasn't a building. It was the split rock of Horeb. A few miles away from the main peak, there is a massive 5-story tall boulder that looks like it was sliced down the middle by a giant laser. At the base of this rock, there are clear signs of water erosion. Here's why that's a fact-based nightmare for skeptics. This is a desert that gets almost zero rainfall. You don't get deep, smooth, water-worn channels on a rock in a place this dry unless a massive amount of water was pumping out of it for a long time. The drone's high-res zoom showed that the erosion isn't from the top down, like rain. It's from the inside out. It looks like the rock literally burst. Seeing this through a drone screen makes it feel like you're looking at a crime scene from 3,500 years ago. Every time the camera panned, we found more coincidences, stone pillars, ancient Hebrew inscriptions, Proto-Sinaitic script carved into the rock faces, and even what looked like the remains of a 12-pillar monument. Individually, you could explain them away. Collectively, they start to form a picture that's hard to ignore. We weren't just looking at rocks. We were looking at the fingerprints of a massive group of people who stayed here, left their mark, and then vanished into the desert. The dirt doesn't lie. but it does stay quiet. The ripple effect. So why should we be afraid? It sounds a bit dramatic, right? If you find an old campsite or some carved rocks, usually that's cause for a celebration and a grant from a university. But the thing here isn't about being afraid of the past. It's about being afraid of the present. Archaeology in the Middle East isn't just about dusty pottery. It's about land, identity, and the very foundations of global religions. If a drone scan proves that the real Mount Sinai is actually in Saudi Arabia, specifically Jabal al-Lawz, it creates a massive geopolitical headache. For one, the traditional site in Egypt, St. Catherine's, is a UNESCO World Heritage Site and a huge part of the Egyptian tourism economy. Suggesting it's the wrong mountain is like telling people the Eiffel Tower is actually a replica and the real one is in Belgium. It upends centuries of tradition, pilgrimage, and localized faith. Then there's the Saudi side of things. For decades, the area around Jabal al-Lawz was fenced off, guarded by men with submachine guns. To the Saudi authorities, this wasn't just a mountain, it was a sensitive zone. There's a persistent fear that if the site is proven to be the biblical Sinai, it could lead to land claims or a massive influx of religious tourists that the region isn't ready to handle. When the drone footage showed those specific anomalies, it wasn't just finding history, it was potentially uncovering a ticking political time bomb. Beyond the politics, there's the theological fear. Many modern scholars have spent their entire careers arguing that the Exodus was a myth, a beautiful story meant to provide a national identity, but with no basis in physical reality. They've written books, earned tenures, and built a whole consensus on the idea that these events never happened because there is no evidence. When the drone starts producing 3D models of structures that look exactly like the descriptions in the Book of Exodus, that consensus starts to crack. And scientists, much like theologians, hate being wrong. The reality is that the more facts we find, the more we have to admit that the ancient texts might have been more like a journalist's notebook than a poet's dream. It forces a collision between the secular world and the religious world that most people would rather avoid. We also have to talk about the fear of certainty. There's something safe about a mystery. As long as Mount Sinai is lost, everyone can have their own version of it. But once you have high-res coordinates and LiDAR data, the mystery dies. You're left with the cold, hard reality of stone and bone. For some, the evidence is a relief. For others, it's a burden. Finding out the truth means we can no longer hide behind, "it's just a metaphor." The drone didn't just find rocks. It found the end of an era of speculation. The digital ghost. The most haunting thing about the drone's data wasn't the big, obvious stuff like the altar or the mountaintop. It was the micro-evidence. When you're looking at a screen from a few hundred feet up, you start to notice patterns in the soil that you'd completely step over if you were walking on the ground. We call these anthropogenic signatures, basically the permanent scars humans leave on the earth just by existing in a place for a long time. The LiDAR picked up a massive network of what looked like ancient footpaths. These weren't established roads or trade routes that connected one city to another. They were desire lines. They radiated out from the base of the mountain into the surrounding plain like a giant web. In a place that hasn't seen a permanent settlement in thousands of years, these paths shouldn't be visible. Yet the drone's sensors showed compacted earth that suggests thousands of feet once trod these specific lines, packing the desert floor so tightly that even millennia of wind and sand haven't been able to erase them. Then there's the trash, or rather, the lack of it. One of the biggest arguments against the Exodus story is that 1 million people living in a desert for a month would leave behind a mountain of broken pottery and waste. But the drone's thermal imaging picked up something interesting: localized hotspots of mineral concentrations. When we looked closer, these matched the locations of ancient hearths, fire pits. The frightening element here is for the skeptic. If you find a few fire pits, it's a nomadic family. If you find thousands of them mapped out in a grid-like pattern that spans the entire valley, you aren't looking at a family, you're looking at an army or a nation. The drone allowed us to see the scale of the occupation. It showed us that for a brief window in history, this empty wasteland was one of the most densely populated places on Earth. What makes this true is the silence of the data. The drone doesn't have an agenda, it just measures density and light. And the density of the ground at the base of Jabal al-Lawz tells a story of a massive, organized camp. It's a digital ghost of a crowd that hasn't been seen in 3,000 years. Seeing those millions of tiny footprints on a digital wireframe makes the hair on your arms stand up. It's the moment you realize that the ground is holding onto a memory that historians tried to tell us was just a legend. History is a heavy thing to dig up. The conclusion. As the drone finally touched down, its rotors slowing to a stop, the desert returned to its usual heavy silence. We packed up the gear, but the mood in the camp had shifted. We had set out to find facts, but what we actually found was a bridge between what we believe and what we can prove. The drone's memory cards were full of data, gigabytes of LiDAR scans, thermal maps, and 4K footage that suggested the story we've been telling for millennia isn't just a story, it's a place. Is Jabal al-Lawz the actual Mount Sinai? The drone says it's a very strong candidate. It has the scorched peak, the cattle art, the altar, and the strange, split rock that looks like it once bled water. It matches the blueprint of the ancient texts with an almost uncomfortable accuracy. But even with all that evidence, there will always be room for doubt. Archaeology is rarely about smoking guns. It's about the slow accumulation of clues until the mountain of evidence becomes impossible to ignore. What we feared was true isn't a monster or a curse. It's the realization that the world is much older and much more connected to its myths than we like to admit. In our modern high-tech lives, we like to think we've moved past the ancient mysteries. We have satellites and smartphones. We think we've mapped everything. But the drone showed us that there are still secrets hiding in plain sight, tucked away in restricted zones and forgotten valleys. Finding the physical site of an ancient legend doesn't actually end the conversation. It just starts a new, more complicated one. If this is the mountain, then we have to ask ourselves, what else did the ancients get right? It forces us to look at the ground beneath our feet with a bit more respect. We realize that the terror was actually a form of awe. It's the feeling of standing in the footprint of something much larger than yourself. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long purple shadows across the Sinai, the mountain seemed to retreat back into the dark. The drone had seen what it needed to see. We had the coordinates, the scans, and the proof that something incredible happened here. Whether the world is ready to accept those facts is another story entirely. For now, the mountain remains, half myth, half granite, and entirely real. Perhaps the drone saw what was never meant to be uncovered, and the world may never be the same. Subscribe to stay on the front lines of the truth. Thanks for supporting the channel.